For all my listeners out there who consider themselves a day hiker, like myself, you gotta check out Hike It Off magazine, and it's written exclusively with the day hiker in mind. I seriously love this magazine, and the founder, Jamie, was a previous guest on our podcast, and her story behind the magazine is really phenomenal. It's one of the first magazines to focus solely on day hiking, and they share everything from gear reviews to expert advice, inspiring interviews, in-depth trail coverage, and all things day hiking related. Their mission is to share the good vibe and healing energy of hiking and inspire deep-rooted connection to the outdoors. And I know that's something we can all get behind. They're 100% digital magazine. They want to leave the trees in the forest, of course. It's free and it can be downloaded at hikeitofflife.com. All right, let's get into the episode.
It's not about having the best gear. It's about using your gear to the fullest that you have now. I realized not having things really made me work with what I had, and I'm not going to be put down by the circumstances I've been put in by like crappy light or we don't have pro climbers. I don't really care about that stuff. So let me figure out how to work with what I have.
Today's guest is Irene Yee, whose pronouns are she, her. Irene is owner of Lady Lockoff Photography. Irene is a rock climbing and adventure photographer, a National Geographic Adventure contributor, and internationally published in magazines such as Outside, Climbing, and Alpinist. She's also worked with companies like The North Face, Marmot, Outdoor Research, Mountain Hardware, and the Honnold Foundation. As you'll hear in today's episode, Irene finds inspiration in those with passion over muscle, and she has a deep focus on uplifting women as well as POC and LGBTQIA 2+ communities. So let's get into it. I'm your host, Liz Landeen, and this is The Outdoor Entrepreneur. Hey, Irene, welcome to the show.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing well. I'm so excited to be talking with you today. And I thought maybe somewhere we could start, a good place to start would be with a little bit of terminology.
Okay.
So you're Lady Lockoff on Instagram and your business name is Lady Lockoff Photography. So for those that are not in the climbing world, can you tell us what does lockoff mean?
Lockoff is actually a rock climbing move. It's kind of where you grab a hold and kind of pull up. So now your chest is near your hand and you're sitting kind of in that position. And that is what a lockoff move is kind of called in rock climbing. It's very interesting because my very first kind of really experience with gym climbing was in college. And I could tell that if I learned how to do that, I could actually rock climb better, but like I was not strong enough to like, you're essentially right, holding your body weight on your toes and pulling your body weight in with your hand. And so when you think about it, it's kind of it's difficult to achieve. And then once I actually started rock climbing more, I was able to achieve that. And I felt like that was just a key for me to figure out.
That's awesome. So interesting. Yes, I started rock climbing, was first introduced to it in college as well. So that's pretty cool. So you're a rock climber, you're a photographer, among many other things, I'm sure. But I'm curious, what came first for you? Did rock climbing come first or photography, or did they happen around the same time?
Rock climbing definitely came first. I had recently moved from Boston and landed in Las Vegas, and I wanted to join a gym and make some friends. And really, the least expensive gym, climbing gym. And so that's why I ended up choosing that. And then I went to a meetup group. I was so surprised. They were so welcoming and so friendly that I went back a second time. And then they invited me out that weekend. Once I touched real rock outside, I was like, check, great, doing this for the rest of my life.
I love it. That's awesome. Okay. And then you got started in rock climbing, fell in love with it, obviously. Then when did you get into photography? Like what kind of brought you into that world, or what sparked your interest in photography?
So it's always interesting when people ask me this question, because there's no one time that it was like, oh, this is something that I would like to do. I think holding a camera was always something that interested me. I used to borrow friends' cameras and take photos. in high school and college. But I would never say that I like consider myself a photographer. I liked the idea a lot, but it never kind of sparked a thought process of like, oh, I should do this. It was just like, ooh, I like doing this. And, you know, it would be cool to be a photographer, but like, that's not where my life is taking me. So I would never think that it was something that I actually like could become and feel like I was actually a photographer. But really, when I moved to Las Vegas, what was a huge catalyst for taking photos to start with was just realizing that I loved having these pictures of my friend Valerie and myself. She would like kind of force us to take a selfie whenever we did anything. And I used to always roll my eyes and be like, oh, fine. Right. Like, can we just move on? And then once I got to Las Vegas, I realized how much I really enjoyed those photos because I could remember where, like, I don't remember a lot, but like I remembered everything that I did with Valerie that I had a photo for. And I'm like, okay, so this is for me, this is memory. This is like reminding myself of the things that I'm doing. This is like being able to kind of hold a presence in a different time. And so I was like, cool, I'm rock climbing. I feel pretty cool, whatever it is that I'm doing. And so I was like, yeah, of course I'm going to take photos and remember this thing I'm really getting into and I really enjoy. And so photos became about memory to start with. And then I just started getting more interested. And, as I changed my life, which is what I came to Las Vegas for, and I ended up having expendable income, I had a thought process of perhaps I really want to try this. And I had a coworker who was refurbishing some cameras that he actually got from like wholesale from Las Vegas CSI. And first he tried to convince me that perhaps that wasn't for me. And he's like, well, maybe a GoPro. And I was like, okay. So I like looked up GoPro and I'm like, no, that's not like a camera. I want to take photos. And so he finally I felt like I made him cave to sell me his camera. And then I took it, I read the manual, I started photographing. And then it was something that I just really enjoyed and found that I finally had something that I was kind of naturally good at, which is always really nice. I think we all work really hard to be good at things that don't come naturally to us. And so when you find something that it's not that you don't have to work hard, but the working hard doesn't feel like you're struggling, right? You're just like, I'm working hard and I can feel this. Like it makes sense to me. The way that my brain works well with this kind of creativity. And so, yeah. And then it was just like, boom, took off from there. And I think as a photographer, it gave me something to hold and something to talk about with people. And sometimes when we're socially awkward, you realize how kind of important those crutches are in interactions. But it really opened me up as a person to be able to talk and interact with people because I had something to do.
Yeah, I love that. I'm an introvert at heart, so I can really appreciate that approach to things.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so kind of tell us the story, give us some background. At what point did you realize you wanted to, or again, maybe it wasn't just one point, it kind of just happened over time, but how did you bring these two together, these two things that you really love, rock climbing and photography? How did those kind of start to come together into something that you've been able to make a career out of?
Yeah, I think a lot of passions start as hobbies. You do it because you enjoy it and you love it. And that makes you a little bit more motivated to learn about it and do it a lot. And so that's kind of how that started for me. As I began to photograph more, I realized I got to see things that really inspired me. And I didn't realize how much I needed to see those things. And they were things that I had always kind of coveted, but that wasn't me. And that was just strong women, right? Women with muscle, women who were travelers and did the things that just scared the pants off me, right? But meeting these folks and getting to connect with them and then getting to be able to kind of capture that prowess and be able to share it, that's kind of really what sparked okay, so rock climbing is a great catalyst to show this. And now I have the ability to be able to showcase that in a hopefully creative way. And then, of course, you cannot deny kind of the mix of social media in that. Really, what was a huge catalyst was me starting to post on Instagram and getting great feedback, getting people to connect with, creating a community that also wanted the same things that I wanted, which was women being strong and powerful and independent, kind of just being outside and being able to see that and celebrate it not just with like, look at this kind of rad off the cuff person, but like also this like joy about them from just doing something that they loved. And I think that's always what I try to capture and the things that really like kind of keep me going. Mm-hmm. And then realizing that companies were also interested in that was kind of a slow ramp to be like, oh, okay, this is like something that other people also like and that I could make a living off of, which really kind of scared me because I did not realize that was going to happen.
You're like, it's happening. What's happening? That's awesome. Well, so maybe share a little bit more about what you do. So what do you do now in your business? What are kind of the different ways that you work with people and you share your incredible talents and gifts with the world?
Yeah, my business is quite complex. I find a lot of other business people don't quite know what to do with me because people always want to categorize you. And I kind of cover a lot of ground in categorization. Usually, especially in the climbing outdoor space, people are athletes. Those are the people who have businesses and have income that now needs a business sense about them. But I am not that. I am not an elite athlete. That is definitely never where I would categorize myself. I'm a photographer, but I tend to do a lot of on-camera media as well. And I think more and more in today's world, you know, people are looking for somebody who can do multiple things. I think a lot of the times as creatives, we're either introverted or our attention doesn't, you know, kind of lie in the space that other people want us to be in. And so it's a tough thing, right? To be like, I essentially would call myself a photographer, but that is like, you know, I get to do that 2% of the time that I'm quote unquote running my business, right? Mm-hmm. Like that is such an auxiliary part of kind of the other stuff that I have to do or that I like to do, right? I teach clinics, I do social media. People pay me to be in front of the camera. They pay me to be behind the camera. I create for companies and kind of work commercially for them, for their products. And so I kind of have this wide range of things that I do, which I'm not mad about, but it's hard for some folks to quite pin down what I do. And I guess I'm realizing it's kind of hard for me as well. I realize perhaps I should be a little bit more like on top of that.
No, I think you're on the right path, right? You're following the things that bring you joy, it sounds like. And I'm such a believer that if we do the things that really light our soul on fire and that bring us joy and bring us peace, and if we share that with the world, we inspire others to live their truth and their purpose. And in turn, it's, in my opinion, making the world a better place. And it's such a win-win for everyone. That's what you're doing. That's what I see you doing. And it's really, really beautiful. And it's a great example of how I think impactful being an outdoor entrepreneur can be. And your work seems to have a whole other level of vibe and energy to it. If anybody hasn't been to Irene's Instagram, go to it, check it out. A lot of the pictures you're putting out there, they're different in like a really good way. They're great. Okay. But why do you think your work is different? What makes it stand out from other stuff that's out there?
I think I call myself unconventional in every way. I did not come into this business the way that other people come into this business. You don't really see a lot of people who look like me in this outdoor industry. I think that was more so a few years ago. I think it is changing, but we have a long way to go. But, you know, my thoughts of who belonged outdoors was somebody who's very rugged and doesn't particularly care about hygiene or like, right, is just kind of like rough around the edges. And it took a lot to convince me that I'm like, yeah, you can absolutely wear makeup in the outdoors, or you could not wear makeup. I know it's one of those crazy things that when you really break it down and you realize your own kind of like biases against something, that you've put these things into boxes so you can be like, that's not for me. And you just kind of like write it off. It's interesting because like, I feel like not a lot of people have to like think about this that much about like what makes them different. They just kind of are. For me, it was about, right, it started as a hobby. So I just did what I loved. And I think I came from this a place that I don't think a lot of people can come from anymore, where I didn't have any notion of what rock climbing photography was. I didn't have anybody telling me what it should be. I didn't really know a lot of media because I really wasn't into rock climbing for a while. And so I had this kind of beautiful, natural, like, this is what I like in rock climbing. This is what I think looks good. And I had nobody dictating to me, being like, no, that's not how we do that. Right. And so I got to develop this beautiful voice that was just solely based on my own internal thought process of what I thought looked cool and what I was interested in, and not what other people were interested in or how they would like to see it. It was purely how I would like to see it. And I think that's, usually a lot of pro rock climbing or photographers who cover rock climbing came into it by being a pretty advanced rock climber. And they just, were also happened to be great photographers. Right. And so that is the world that they were immersed in. And I got to immerse my world in like beginner climbing, in fun climbing, in realizing my own capabilities and the people around me. And so, I wasn't photographing pros, I was photographing my friends. And you realize that dynamic is really different, that a lot of people hadn't really done that before. Or like, I had a photographer tell me like, oh yeah, I need this lens to do that. I need that lens to do that. And he's just telling me all this stuff. And in my head, I'm like, well, I feel like I've done that, but I've only had one lens. So like, I'm sure, yeah, great, you could do this. But the things that have made me great are just working with what I have. One of my kind of statements about my work is like, Irene, you are nothing but creative, right? It's not about having the best gear. It's about using your gear to the fullest that you have now. And I think for me, I realized not having things really made me work with what I had. And I'm not going to be put down by the circumstances I've been put in by like crappy light or right. Like we don't have pro climbers. I was like, cool, I don't really care about that stuff. So let me figure out how to work with what I have. And that was kind of the creative challenges, especially the light in the desert is really, really bright. And I realized how much that influenced my photography because I just learned to work with that light as best I could. And in the beginning, it was luck, right? And then there was a little thing where like I was kind of already naturally good at this. So I kind of just relied on those senses a little bit more. And I think that made my work different than what we had seen before.
I love that. Thanks for sharing that. I think it's something I talk to my clients about a lot. And it's this whole concept of like, you get to do things on your own terms. Like you get to build your life, your business, do it in a way that you want to do it and what feels good to you. And you get to kind of create that life by design. And so I love that that's pretty much what you did. It wasn't about how things had been done before or what kind of box you needed to fit into. You just went out and did it your way. And I think that's just such a great example for people that are maybe struggling or looking for a way to build their own business or get out there and do something they're really passionate about. So thanks for sharing that.
And you should realize that not everybody will agree with you. I do things, I think, in rock climbing photography that some people don't particularly like.
Yep.
And that's fine with me. Yeah. I like it and I don't particularly care.
I love it. Yes. That's what we want to embrace.
Just realize like not everybody will like what you do, but that's not what it's about. It's about you liking what you do.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for saying that. We're going to take a quick break, but I can't wait to learn more from our guest about how they live and love the outdoor entrepreneur life. You know how much I love making time for the things that bring me joy. It's literally a key reason why I created this podcast. It's also why I'm so passionate about doing things that make life easier and allow me to feel more organized, less scattered, and more in control of my time. Come on, doesn't that sound amazing? Well, one way I do that is by getting crystal clear on what I want and mapping out a solid plan of action to make it happen. And I love teaching this simple system to others. Whether you're an experienced entrepreneur or an aspiring one, I help people sort through all the shiny things and mental clutter to get massively clear to make it all happen. So if you're ready to move from dreaming into doing and doing it with ease and flow and organization, then I got you. Go to LizLandeen.com as soon as this podcast ends to check out my services page, sign up for my monthly newsletter, or you can schedule a free 30-minute clarity call with me. And as a bonus, all podcast listeners receive a special 10% off if you use discount code OUTDOORS at checkout. All right, now let's get back into the episode. So shifting gears just a little bit, you look like you've been to some incredible places. Do you have a favorite location or a favorite spot that you just absolutely love working from, or maybe it's just playing from, but do you have like a favorite location?
I feel like everywhere new I go is my favorite location. I think that's so hard to pick a favorite because everything has like different things to offer. Like, you know, I guess on like a lazy day, I'd be like, yeah, I really love Red Rock because it's like my backyard. I get to wake up late and go out and photograph and then come back and go to sleep in my own bed. And so like the convenience and just beauty that's right outside my doorway is always going to be my favorite place. But being able to experience something new and different, you always have this like kind of new awe about it. You get to see it for the first time, and that's always exciting. And those feelings are always great. And you're like, okay, yep, this is my new favorite place, right? So
Yep.
You have like new favorite places and old favorite places. And I think that's all you can do, right? Continue to have new favorite places because that means that you're going to those new places and you're not, if that's what your job requires, then that's awesome. And if that's not what your job requires, then it's awesome to have the favorite place that you're in currently.
Love that. Okay. So you touched on this a little bit, but I'm curious what an average day looks like for you. And I realize that might be difficult to answer.
Yeah.
But, you know, you kind of touched on it, the fact that as business owners and as entrepreneurs that yes, there's the things that we love to do and enjoy doing, but many times that may only be a small part of what we have to do to run a business. But I always love to know just kind of like what a day looks like for a business owner, because that's the reality of it, right? So it might not be, hey, I get to just live out in Red Rocks and take pictures all day and that's that. It's like, no, actually, there's a lot of stuff that goes into this and it's not all, you know, fun and games and whatnot.
Yeah, I think nobody talks about this because it's incredibly boring. And this is why people think that when you're an adventure photographer, you're constantly on the road doing stuff. It's because nobody really cares to know about how boring your life actually is. When you add up the days between adventure and like kind of the in-between is always so much greater than the actual adventure things. Right? The actual adventure things are the more fun parts of it. And so I'm going to give you two typical days, right? A typical day that is the boring stuff that nobody wants to hear is I kind of wake up. And now that I run my own business, you realize that you can work kind of whenever you want. I try to get like some business hours that other people regularly work, but like I realize I don't particularly like working in the morning. I like chilling out and doing nothing in the morning. And I usually start my day around 1 p.m. And then I'll work between 1 p.m. and 10 p.m. because that's just when I like to work better. And I don't have to work in the morning, which is nice. But usually I'm just bumming around at home, playing games on my phone, watching television, making breakfast, having coffee, maybe doing some chores, you know, procrastinating a little bit. And then I kind of go to work. And usually what that means for me is answering emails, doing logistics, thinking that I should be doing more than I'm actually doing. That takes up a lot of my time. Doing social media things, hopefully doing some editing. And that's honestly like, that is what I do, is that I wanted my entire life to not work at a desk. And now that I'm like doing really what I love, I like work at a desk more than I ever have in my entire life. And so, yeah, the actual physical adventure part is such a tiny part of what I actually get to do, which is kind of sad. But that's right. When you start running a business, you realize you have to run the business. And so I really love photo editing. And so a lot of times I feel like I'm bribing myself to like, okay, if you do all this, then you can photo edit. And I have to remind myself that photo editing is part of my business. That can entirely be my workday. And I should feel accomplished in that because I love it so much that I like use it as kind of like a bargaining chip with myself to like do actual work. But yeah, so that's like a typical day with me is I mostly go at my own leisurely pace, decide how much work I want to do that day or have to do that day, and then kind of just chill out. But the more exciting part, which is the part that everybody wants to hear about, right, is like the actual adventure part. And right, that's kind of split between just being out there, right? A mixture of meeting people, going, climbing myself, doing things, and then also like being on a job. Being on a job for me is usually like, that's my 40-hour work week, like shoved into, 2-3 days, because you're up before the sun because you want to catch sunrise. Maybe you get a siesta in the middle of the day, but usually you're doing logistics or like traveling to the next spot to sunset, photograph until it's dark. And then when you go back, now you have to deal with all the media uploading and file naming, right? And so then you don't get to bed at midnight and then you got to be up at 3 the next day again. So usually my 40-hour work week, when I do that, is just like, right, that you are going to be working 18, like anywhere between 11 and 20 hours in a few days every day, just to try to get all the media in. And then after that, you get to relax. Maybe you get to sleep in, and then you got to go right into kind of editing, distributing, and like getting that media out to whoever it needs to be in a pretty quick time frame. And so, yeah, adventure is a lot about planning. I mean, that's all I can tell people. But usually a lot of that planning kind of just goes out the window once you're doing the thing. So I always say, plan your adventure and then realize that the plan will most likely change during that adventure. But like, at least if you're planned, you kind of have a thought process of the core things that you need to get done.
Awesome. I love it. So what about your current situation or your current kind of setup right now are you absolutely loving?
I mean, I get to make my own schedule. I'm like, I want to go rock climbing tomorrow. Great. I can just decide to do that.
Yeah. It's a beautiful thing, isn't it?
Yeah. It's interesting because now that I run my own business, I'm like sitting here being like, okay, so like I'm kind of on my phone and I'm just going to take this like break and kind of just do what I want for like an hour. And you're like, is it just that I pretended to work for so long while I really didn't have a lot to do? Or did I actually should have been working during the things that I were doing? And you realize kind of the work days when I had a specific job before, like it's kind of beautiful to realize you don't have to work like that. Like I am just not productive in the morning. And so I just don't be productive in the morning. And I try to just like shift that into the evening where I just feel a little bit more awake and alive and kind of ready to tackle things, And it feels weird. It feels very weird when you don't have to like punch a time clock and have anybody else to go to or have to be accountable to. Now, number one, sometimes I think that's a detriment because sometimes I don't work as fast as I think I should because I don't have anybody to be accountable to. But whenever I have to make major decisions, I'm just like, okay, Irene, somebody's asking you what your speaker fee is. Great. This is my speaker fee. Okay, great. Done. Right. And you realize like how quick decisions can be made and how slow decisions have to be made in a company where they like have to be debated and they have to go through 3 bosses. And you're like, that's so nice. Just be like, yep, this is how I'm going to do it now. And you're like, okay, great. Moving on.
I love that. Well, and I mean, kind of on the flip side to that, I always like to show maybe the parts that aren't so perfect or maybe that you're not loving right now, because I think as entrepreneurs, it's ever evolving, right? And many times we're always in the process of just figuring shit out. And so is there anything in particular you're like, oh, I need to improve upon this, or maybe you just want to up level or you see yourself kind of going to for next level stuff?
I feel like that's the battle, right? It's the battle of between I could always be doing more and I am doing everything that I can. That is a very hard balance to find because you could always be doing more. And then there are always times where you cannot handle more. And I think self-motivation is very difficult. It's something that I've struggled with. There's a lot of things that I want to photograph, but not a lot of people that are on board with me in accomplishing that. And I'm very specific and intentional about who I work with because things that I want to showcase, the things that get me excited, usually don't include a lot of people. And so to also get people to understand your photographic vision and are willing to do the things that you're willing to do is kind of challenging, you know? And so it's a lot about trying to find and plan things that are not around yourself. Because I'm one of those people who can, right? I'm happy to work incredibly hard to achieve the things that I want to do. But now with adventure, you're involving other people that you kind of have to get on board. And the crazy things that you're willing to do, like, hey, I'm going to like try to bring as little food and as water as possible so I can carry stuff that includes my camera and a sleeping bag so I can sleep overnight so we can be ready for the light in the morning. You know, trying to find people who are like, especially two people who are like willing to do that with you is harder than you think. And that for me is kind of emotionally draining. And so trying to realize when that emotional drain is worth it, when you have somebody who's kind of on board with you, I think we all say that we would like to be available, but life is real and people are unavailable for different reasons that are nobody's fault. That is life. But it's incredibly hard to think about that motivation and not feel constantly overwhelmed by the amount of planning that needs to happen for your vision to come true. That is not you only participating in that. You have to now find two other people who are as crazy as you, who want the same thing for one photograph. Right? That's a difficult challenge. And so, yeah, working for yourself is equally awesome and equally hard and crappy.
Well, yeah, I feel like this is something I hear a lot is just this whole kind of self-talk around, should I be doing more? Like, am I doing enough? And just the constant battle internally in our brains of like feeling like we never are doing enough. And I'm a big scheduler. I like live in my calendar. And I feel like that helps me a lot, that I can literally go to my calendar and be like, I did everything I said I was going to do today. I'm done. Like I'm closing it down. And I find that helps a lot.
Well, you also have to be realistic of what you can physically do in a day. We all have no idea the capacity that we're capable of, but also the capacity that we're not capable of. That is like, today is not the day for you to get a lot of stuff.
Right.
That is
and every day is different. It's so true.
Exactly. I think that's why it's hard to give advice or inspiration, because you're like, look, I'm a human being and life happens in different stages and different things happen at different times. And sometimes I'm like really on top of it. And sometimes I drop the ball.
Yeah.
And, you know, we don't like to work that way as humans. We like a standard way that is proven of boxes that we can understand. And so when you come out of that timeline, you're like, should I? Right. And then a lot of your emotional energy goes to worrying about that rather than doing something about it, because that's just where we naturally go.
Yeah. Yeah. So true. I'm curious too. So as I mentioned, I first got into rock climbing back in college. Before that, so I'm from Connecticut originally. And before college, I didn't even know rock climbing was a thing. Like it just wasn't in my sphere. I didn't know people actually did that. And then I moved out to Colorado and everybody seems to rock climb there. But it had a really like profound impact on my life, like especially as a younger woman. I think it really helped me to just kind of feel more empowered and feel like, you know, I could do hard things and I could get out of my comfort zone and be okay and all of that. And so I'm curious, what has rock climbing taught you over the years that you feel like you've been able to apply, whether that's to your personal life or to your business or to being an entrepreneur and owning your own business? What have you been able to kind of apply over the years that you've learned where you feel like rock climbing has taught you?
Rock climbing has changed my life. It provides you with so many things. For me, number one, it provided me with like understanding myself, because when you rock climb, right? I mean, essentially there's a belayer, right? You're keeping yourself safe, but it's you on the rock. There's nothing to really help you that's not yourself. And so you have to learn how to trust your own body. And you also have to learn when you're done, when you're like, this is not going well. Like, why am I banging my head against this wall when I don't have to? Where I could come down and leave it be for a little while and try again tomorrow. That's really what rock climbing teaches you. It teaches you about yourself, because it's a very kind of selfish pursuit that you are trying to achieve. Because it's such a singular pursuit, you will just learn so much about yourself, right? You learn about when you're done, but you also learn about what you're actually capable of. When you achieve, the achievement is so exciting to know that you physically climbed up this wall with nothing but yourself, physically and mentally. That was all you. There are not many things that you can say was all you. And I always say, my goal is to not get people into rock climbing. That's never my goal with the images that I produce. My goal is to get you to try something that you didn't think was possible. Because once you do that, what else do you think that you can now do that you didn't think was possible? And that is the larger story of what I try to inspire in people. It's about using what you have and figuring out how to make it work for you in a way that does actually work for you, either mentally or physically, or in your life, or in rock climbing, or in whatever pursuit that you want to do.
Well, damn, I'll say it's working because you literally just got me so fired up climbing. Yeah, I couldn't agree more with everything you said on just kind of what climbing can do for you. And I think, as you mentioned, the larger kind of message is it doesn't have to be rock climbing. This can be anything. It can be anything in your life that just gets you out there and growing and expanding and elevating in your life. And that can come in many different ways, but to just freaking get out there and do something that maybe scares you a little bit or just excites you, right? And I think that's really beautiful. But literally, I was listening to you and I'm like, oh shit, I have got to get climbing. It's been way too long. So I love that. All right. So as we're starting to wrap up, where can people find you?
Mostly everything is almost exclusively through my Instagram account at Lady Lockoff. And then I do have a website if you want to check that out and just look at some great images. And then, between website and Instagram, that's the best way to view and experience and engage with my work.
Perfect. And we'll put all of that in the show notes. And then as our last question, as you know, I'm a strategy and action coach. So I created this podcast, not just to kind of talk and dream about things, but to show people how they can combine like a job that they love with the outdoors and to see that it's possible and that everyday people, just like you, just like me, anybody can do it. So ultimately, I really want to inspire people, like you want to inspire people to take massive action towards their own dreams and their own goals. So with that in mind, I'd love to close out with an action challenge. It can be business related, it can be just life related, or it can be outdoor, whatever you want. But what's one thing you want people to get out there and do in pursuit of their dreams and their goals?
I really hate giving advice that is actually not useful to people, right? Telling people to go and do it is not like an actually actionable thing for people. It's like people telling you just be happy. And you're like, that is terrible advice. That's just not how this works. And so I would tell people to, number one, listen to advice that actually speaks to you. There's tons of advice out there. And if it doesn't speak to you, then it's probably not the best advice for you because it's not how you think. So if you're not like giving in to the advice that I'm about to give, it's okay. But really realize that your dreams and goals will always change, right? You do not have to be stuck on one dream for the rest of your life and give all of yourself into something that is not working for you. Be flexible and be able to make changes. And we do that by self-reflection, right? By sitting down and taking a look at what is working and what is not. And those changes are incredibly hard, right? I'm not saying that that is an easy thing to do, to realize that you are on a path that is not good for you, because you have, right? A lot of folks have so much deeply invested in that monetarily, socially, that it is very hard to make that sort of change. And if you can do it gradually, start on that path. So I challenge you to be realistic with yourself and be able to be flexible, because I think that those are very, very difficult things for most people to achieve.
All right. Well, this is a perfect place for us to close out. We'll put all the ways that our listeners can learn more about you and your work in the show notes. And then thank you again so much for sharing your journey with us. It's been a blast talking with you, and keep kicking ass and happy adventuring.
Thank you so much for having me. This was so much fun.
My goal as a business strategy and action coach, and why I ultimately created this podcast, is to inspire you to take massive action towards your own dreams and goals. So if you're enjoying this podcast and you find the content valuable, like, subscribe, or follow me wherever you get your podcasts. And I always love hearing from my listeners, so please leave a review. And until next time, be sure to live life on your terms. And if you're not, make a plan and make it happen, my friend. Adventure awaits. Thanks for listening.